I'm Dr. Thomas McCluskey, a postdoctoral researcher in the graduate school. You might have been told that your research should tell a story, but what exactly does that mean? How can your research, based on methods, data, and findings, be a story? This workshop will explore how narratives can help graduate students articulate the significance of their scholarship in oral communication contexts. Through representative anecdotes and compelling stories, participants will learn how to show their audiences why their research matters to make sure their voice is heard. Narratives are a great way to get your audience's attention when talking about your research. They can help crystallize for your audience in meaningful ways why your scholarship matters. Why do stories work, especially with audiences who aren't familiar with what you do? Because we are wired for narrative structure. Communication scholar Walter Fisher argues that people are fundamentally storytelling creatures and that narratives are essential ways to appeal to audiences. He argues that the best and most compelling stories require both narrative fidelity and narrative coherence. First, narrative fidelity can help crystallize for your audience why your research matters by helping them relate to your project and understand its significance. Fisher argues that narrative fidelity is the degree to which a story fits into the observer's experience with other accounts, and how the experience of a story rings true with past stories they know to be true in their lives. When audiences can relate to a story because the structure, situations, or actions are familiar, the information shared is more readily accessible. While audiences might not be able to relate to spending long hours in a lab doing experiments with little success, they likely can understand analogous situations such as doing a puzzle or filling out a crossword puzzle with frustrating results. Similarly, they can understand what a breakthrough can feel like when you finally succeed in putting the last puzzle piece on the board. Creating stories with high narrative fidelity can help your audience feel like they are on your side in the story, and they will end up hoping for your success. When presenting your research, compelling stories with high narrative fidelity can help audiences feel invested in your work. For example, telling a story about how you became interested in your research in the first place can resonate with your audience since they likely have passions and interests of their own. Rather than saying you study nationalism in the former Soviet Union, tell a story about how Ukrainian protesters toppled a monument to Vladimir Lenin and replaced it with a golden toilet to critique the outgoing regime's corruption. People will be able to imagine the protesters and picture their angry chants in the freezing cold and understand why you were interested in those people since you presented a compelling story about their struggle. Narratives can take abstract concepts and animate them for your audience during a presentation, and using narrative fidelity can make your research talk more memorable. Second, research critic M. Griffin explains, narrative coherence is the degree to which a story makes sense. Narrative stories are internally consistent with sufficient detail, strong characters, and free of significant surprises. All of the things that make your favorite film or book compelling apply here. Good stories have heroes and villains, a quest or a search, challenges, rising action, climaxes, resolutions, and morals that point the audience towards a key lesson. When presenting your research, consider which stories you can tell and what the key takeaway is from your scholarship. You might present yourself as being on a hero's journey to solve a problem in your field. There was something to overcome, a gap that your research helped bridge. What villains or barriers stand in your way? Relying on key details can make these stories animate your research for your audience. For example, highlighting your own search for an explanation in your field can help your audience imagine your research as a journey towards important discoveries. Simply saying that you're examining how mites attack honeybees is clear but uninteresting for non-specialists in your field. Instead, explain how, for decades, scientists assumed the mites attacked the bees everywhere, but you realize that they never actually proved that conclusion. Tell the story of how your research involves struggles, long hours, and eventually an important breakthrough. This will not only explain the significance of your work, but also help your audience become invested in your success. Third, presenting representative anecdotes can help your audience understand the significance of your research in concise and accessible ways. Rather than develop entire narratives about your research, sometimes a simple anecdote can summarize concisely why your research matters for your audience and explain how it relates to their lives. As rhetorician Kenneth Burke explains, A representative anecdote must be supple and complex enough to be representative of the subject matter it is designed to calculate. It must have scope, yet it must also present simplicity in that it is a broad reduction of subject matter. Isolating what short example might best represent your research can be challenging. Consider what the core argument is that you're trying to make in your presentation, and then look for an example that illustrates that claim. If you're working with complex scientific experiments, what's an example of a previous time something similar to your research was developed, and what were its impacts on society? If you're exploring theoretical concepts, what are the practical implications? Isolating even a few examples and applications can help animate and clarify your research's argument for your audience. Narratives can define the urgency and significance of research during presentations. In this workshop, we discussed one strategy for articulating the significance of graduate student scholarship. Through representative anecdotes and compelling narratives, you can explain why your research matters to any audience by telling them the story of your work. Please visit the Graduate School Writing Center for additional support on writing and oral communication activities.